Hi, welcome to the International Schools Podcast. I'm here, as always, with John Mixon. John, how are you?
Good, Dan. You have been just globetrotting. It's just been amazing. James and you have been like everywhere in Asia and the Middle East.
This is always a busy time of the year for us. From September to December, it's when most of my travel is. I had a couple of interesting trips. I was in Hong Kong when the super typhoon. I'm not sure if you ever had experienced a super typhoon. It was my first time.
I did once in Japan when I was living in Japan, but I was inland, but just watching it, vicariously through the local channels.
Yeah, we couldn't go out. We were inside for a day and a half. They closed down the airport, which never happened before in Hong Kong. They closed down the airport for 36 hours. They even flew out all the aircraft that were on the ground. They didn't even want to leave them on the ground.
Wow.
And it was kind of 230 kilometer an hour winds or something. It was kind of, the buildup was, it was kind of a very tense buildup because I was going to leave, but then I left it too late and I couldn't change my flight because the flights were full. So I'm like, I'll just hang out. So I was here in a sort of mostly empty hotel. It was a bit like The Shining, everyone kind of hanging out together in the hotel. It was very, very kind of bonding experience. It was quite interesting, really.
That's great. Well, today we have we're meeting and talking with two guests from Inspire Citizens, but it's Scott and Sophie, and I'm going to quickly do their bios, and then Dan, I would love you. There's just this connection we've just made, which is super interesting.
Yeah, I was involved in Origin, so yeah.
Yeah. So Scott is a global collaboration lead and facilitator with Inspire Citizens. He's the co-director of Future Now, student leadership, and Scott works with international schools to deepen global citizenship and sustainable learning. He began his career as a math teacher in Thailand and went to teach schools across Abu Dhabi, Kuwait, Beijing. And unfortunately, after a life-changing accident, Scott returned to classroom as a teacher and learning support specialist before moving into his current role. He's really trying to focus on making learning purposeful, inclusive, and connected to the real-world challenges. And it's so nice to have you here, Scott, today. Thank you for joining us.
Great to be here, John. I'm really excited to have a conversation.
And with him is Sophie Peccaud. Sophie is a partnership specialist with Inspire Citizens. She works around the world connecting schools with meaningful opportunities for global citizenship and service learning. Her background is in business, and her international experience takes place in Latin America, Southeast Asia, Europe, and beyond. And she has been involved with projects for sustainable tourism in the Amazon and storytelling initiatives on global citizenship. Her focus is really building those collaborations that help schools integrate a sustainability, purpose, real-world impact into education. And Sophie, so nice to have you here too. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having us. Really excited about this.
Dan, go for it. Tell us this connection, which is just wild.
Yeah, well, when we ran a Google Summit in Taiwan with a guy called Dave Freeman, I'm not sure if any of you know, he's left education now. Unfortunately, he's a really good friend of mine, speaks fluent Mandarin, and he brought Aaron and Steve, obviously rest in peace, Steve, to do some work with him in Taiwan when they were both still working in Beijing. So this was kind of right when Inspire Citizens were starting. So we spent 2 days like workshopping and doing things with Aaron and Steve. We were all thinking to get involved in some way, but in the end, nobody had any time. So Dave didn't get involved, and we didn't. Apart from we've always promoted Inspire Citizen events. So yeah, really, it was that we were right there when Aaron and Steve were founding it. So it was great to see that.
That's amazing. So one of the things that might be helpful, Scott and Sophie, is before we kind of dig into some of the themes we thought would be nice, tell us a bit about the organization. And maybe, Scott, you can give one aspect and then Sophie another, so we have kind of an idea, a point of reference for our audience that might not be familiar with your organization. Scott, if I can ask you to start, and then Sophie, if you just can tag along. Thank you.
For sure. Our organization is really all about this idea of holistic global citizenship and supporting students to grow as global citizens through their work in schools. And that is involving whole schools. We design whole school programs for global citizenship education. That might look like service learning. It might look like community engagement. It might be student leadership. It might be just ways we can get students to apply their learning in a meaningful way and connect beyond the classroom. And thinking about all these great skills and all this knowledge we're acquiring in the classroom, how do we apply this in a meaningful way to have a positive impact in our community. And we support schools on all levels. We start with leadership, thinking about the big picture and how we might design a system, agreeing upon approaches and frameworks that we might use to really bring this to life. This exists in our missions. If we look at school missions across the world, we see things like global citizenship and preparing students for the future and having students be active citizens and doing good work. And this is how we generate evidence of this. So we work with schools to design programs and work with teachers to build capacity for this work and help them to plan this out as we implement these programs. And we also work directly with students, whether we're working with them to develop changemaker projects or student leadership programs. And we love to tell stories. Part of our mission is about storytelling, and we feel we connect through stories. The last thing a school needs probably is another set of standards. That's not what we do. We look at bringing in some of the things that they're already doing, looking at the amazing work, and looking at that through our framework that we call empathy to impact, to think about how we start from a place of empathy, and our learning leads us to working with a community partner to have a positive impact in our community.
Awesome. Sophie.
Well, that was a pretty strong description.
I know. Yeah, it's awesome.
One of the things we always say is that we have as a why to be a solution for SDG, Sustainable Development Goal 4.7, which is all about education and global citizenship. And it's all about, bringing those complex issues that we might experience or that we care about or that we want to do something about. And we're really bringing those topics into the classrooms. And well, I'm a bit more recent to Inspire Citizens, but I've been working with many companies doing different things in service learning and global citizenship. And I think what I love about Inspire Citizens is that we really collaborate on the long term with schools so that we can build a sustainable system that really transforms the school's culture and systems on the long term.
Interesting, and thank you so much for that overview. I think one of the things that would be interesting is, as you are working in this idea of sustainable and human future, do you each have a personal journey that kind of made you, because none of you are from the founding. Dan just shared the story of the founders and one who passed away, rest in peace. But you came later in the game, so to speak. What do you have some personal journey that kind of said, oh, I want to be working with this. I want to be working with students. I really want this humane kind of focus and sustainability. Sophie.
Yeah, I completely do. I come from a slightly different background, actually, than my team members. I come from business studies, where when I was 18, I wanted to connect a bit more to the world, and I wanted to go out there and see how I can find my role. And so when I studied business, I sometimes realized that what I was learning about doesn't really connect to the real world, and especially to impact. And the private sector and business in general has a huge role to play to change the way we do things and what we can do about the world. And so when I was 18, I started to travel. I went to the British Virgin Islands in the Caribbean, and then I went to Brazil. And when I was in Brazil, I met someone called Anna, who profoundly changed my life. She was a social entrepreneur, and that's when I heard about that term. And basically, it means that instead of having a business that makes money, it's having a business that has a mission, and that mission obviously is supported by a business model to make it long term. And so when I met her, I thought, wait, I do not learn that in the school. I learned that on the ground. And so that was something I wanted to know more about. And the following year, I traveled to the Philippines, and I was in the founding team of a startup called Make a Difference Courses. And we were really bringing that level of what you learn through traveling to the classroom. So what you learn about empathy, being a good human, being open-minded, connecting with people, connecting with community partners. And we would bring teams of students to the Philippines, to indigenous communities, to do community-based tourism and really have that, life-changing experience. And I realized that's really something I want to do at scale. When COVID happened, being in a travel agency was really not the right spot to be in. And so we kind of had to reinvent, and see how we can still have that level of impact and connection, but doing it through the virtual world. And so that's when we started to work directly with schools. And I started to join those international education conferences. And I joined CISA, the conference in Eastern and Western Europe, and or Eastern and Central Europe, actually. And so I met Aaron, and he gave that speech. And well, if you know Aaron, he's pretty good at giving speeches that inspire people, hence the name Inspire Citizens. And I was stoked. I was so inspired by the work he's doing and really the skill that this has, the potential that it's not just about, and I mean, it's great to do experiential learning and to do trips, but he would really change the entire systems of a school and work on the curriculum, on the student leadership programs, with the clubs, with the students, with the teachers. And I really wanted to be part of that. And so 2 years ago, I WhatsApped him actually, and I simply just asked, do you need help with anything? Because I would love to help. And 2 years later, here I am working full-time for Inspire Citizens, and it's been a really cool adventure.
Fantastic story. Thank you so much. Scott.
Before I share my story, I just want to say how lucky and just share a bit of gratitude. Sophie joined our team about 1.5 years ago, and she's got this superpower. She's so great at connecting with people and does such amazing work for us. And we are so grateful to have her on our team. Just a quick anecdote. We met for the first time last spring in Budapest about 25 minutes before we had to be on stage together to give a keynote at the Changemaker conference in Budapest. And it couldn't have gone smoother. We had never met, and we kind of had a plan going into this, and being on stage together, it was so easy just because of who she is. And we're really grateful to have her on our team to do the amazing work that she does.
Oh, thank you.
My story is a little bit more traditional. I started out as a teacher and worked in different international schools. Pretty much my whole career has been spent in different international schools around the world, and as a teacher and as a school leader. And I was starting to see a disconnect between the kind of things we're learning in school and the world that we live in. And every year it seemed to be a little bit more disconnected with the work, that traditional curriculum approach that so many schools are still doing that's relatively the same as previous decades, yet the world we live in is different. And I wasn't sure where I fit into that. And then this is about 2013. I'm in a car accident. I break my neck. I become a quadriplegic. And I got told a lot of things that I couldn't do. I would never be back teaching. I'd never be back overseas. And my goal was to prove them wrong. And I did end up back overseas, but it was not a smooth transition to get back into schools. And I felt I was kind of adrift a little bit and had lost my sense of purpose. And that's when I met Steve and Aaron. And this is early on. Inspire Citizens is just sort of taking shape as kind of a bar napkin idea. But this idea that we might focus school around global citizenship instead of having our curriculum as the base. And I'm not anti-curriculum, but I think there's ways we can use global citizenship as a way to connect all these different pieces in our learning. And through conversations with those guys and just seeing how this might take shape. And these are two very inspiring people. As Sophie mentioned, Aaron still does amazing work as our organizational leader. And I think it just brought me in. And originally, with my disability and with so much travel involved, it wasn't the right fit for me to join Inspire Citizens at that time. But as we moved into the pandemic, all of a sudden, a lot of work went virtual, and they were doing really well. They had a lot of opportunities to connect with different schools and sort of were beyond capacity, and they invited me to join. And it's been the greatest decision I ever made. I started out part-time and worked my way into a full-time role. And it's been just so fulfilling to be able to work as a thought leader in this space and to help schools to really bring their mission to life and to help students be able to take those things and apply them in a meaningful way in their community and be able to see that impact. Their actions matter. It's really, to me, it's all about mindset. And some of our youngest learners can be involved in this work. And we set up that mindset that what I do matters and I can make a difference and I can shape the future I want to live in through what I do. I think that's pretty powerful.
Thank you both. One of the things that I think, when you talk about global citizenship and humanity, these are really abstract terms.
Mm.
Many of the students in international schools come from very stable economic backgrounds. They tend to be more on the wealthier side if you compare it to a global income. They're well taken care of. They're used to flying. They're used to staying at the Sheratons, etc. And then you're trying to tell them that you need to be a global citizenship. You need to be empathetic. You need to understand people don't have as many opportunities as you. How do you turn something so abstract and to make it, because you get, as Sophie, you mentioned, a lot of schools fly kids in, they build a wall in some third world country, and then they come back home and they feel they've done a good deed. I want to kind of hear you to counter that. How do you counter that, where schools sometimes it's not because they can't, it's just the structure, the timetable, just the way schools are set up with the calendar and the transients. How do you actually make this impactful? How do you make this grounded so it's just not kind of a fly-by-night thing? I'll let either of you start.
So one word you said, actually, John, that for me is very important is this idea of disconnection. I feel like, we're in a society where there's different people in different situations. And sometimes you have this idea of living in a bubble, of having students who are disconnected from their local communities or local environments. And so the framework that we're using is all about how does empathy lead to impact, right? And empathy is the very first stage to reconnecting, to getting kids to reconnect with the local partners, local communities. And I mean, I've seen the difference when you have kids who are first introduced to it and are like, wait, why am I talking about that? That's not going to give me good grades or get me to university. And then when you get them to think about their role, what they love, what they want to do, and how they can make the world a better place, then if you give them the right tools and the right support and the right networks, then they really engage in their learning. I mean, how many times did we hear kids going out of middle school or high school and sharing to their parents or to their friends, wait, I heard like everything I learned about is not useful, or I can't apply it, or I don't know what I want to do in the university, or I don't even know what I want to do as a job. And so that for me is something that I wished my high school or my school experience in general would give me as tools to reflect on that. And if we're thinking on the macro level and we're zooming out, I mean, we live in a complex world. We live in a world where we keep on hearing bad news. I mean, most of the young kids, they get their information from social media, and we all know that social media is not the positive narrative that we want them to be exposed to. And so if they already have all of that noise of complex issues, people who are having problems, the environment, the nature that's slowly, dying around us, then I think it's our role as educators and young professionals and just, passionate change makers in general to give them that level of exposure to they can do something about it, and positive narratives are existing and we're sharing them with them so that they can really do something about it and be involved, And if you think about the population that goes to international schools, most probably they're going to have a leading role in tomorrow's world. They're going to lead businesses, they're going to lead associations, they're going to go into politics, they're going to do all of those amazing things. And if we spark that little inspiration, or we always say that little seed that then they can nurture on their own through their experiences, then we can really make a change that will be scalable and that will allow all of us to share the planet and to be better people. And that really matters.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah, Sophie, I mean, I think you made a really good point then about doing work in your local community. I think service learning is great. It's one of the things I want my kids to be doing at school. But I think often, schools can maybe focus on these as kind of a nice overseas trip and not focus as much on what they can impact in poorer people and disadvantaged people in the local communities. So that's something I think you mentioned that you also encourage schools to do.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, we always think about local impact, but global perspectives. Both are important because they are in international environments. But, you can think about your local community, but you can also think about the school context. Like you can work on food waste, you can work on canteen, you can work on getting to know the staff, you can work on being kinder to other students. Like there's so many things that you can do right there. And as you said, Dan, if they get sent overseas to like a country that they don't even know and that they probably won't go to anymore, it's still a beautiful experience, but it doesn't give them that real I can do something about it mentality. While if they're working with the local community, then they can actually feel empowered to do something at their own scale and in their own environments.
Yep.
Scott, any thoughts?
Many, actually, and I'll try to be brief. One of the things I was thinking about is experiential learning and those trips and how it becomes more an event. And we really work with schools through a program we call Inspired Experiences to really have global citizenship become part of the culture. So we're making long-term partnerships. We're connecting prior to that trip. We're connecting the learning in our classroom to that on-site experience. And then we have post-learning after that, where we've done something, whether that's overseas or whether it's in our local community, and maybe we have an off-schedule week like Discovery Week or Week Without Walls or whatever we have that gives us a bit of time for this kind of work. Then how do we continue that relationship? And how do we know if we're successful? Making sure that we clearly define working with our community partner, whoever we're working with, to co-plan this. So we're not just coming in and saying, well, here's how we fix this problem, but really deeply understanding the problem and making connections to understand why that problem still exists in the first place and all of the complex pieces that go into it. And then thinking about what can we do? How do we apply the skills and knowledge that we have collaboratively to have a positive impact? And how do we define success? How do we know we've had an impact? And being able to have that open lines of communication and be able to help students to see the impact they're having can be such powerful learning. It's also engaging for students. When we're learning in the classroom, sometimes we're seeing students kind of disengaged a little bit because they don't see that connection. They don't see themselves in this work. But we can apply that in a meaningful way in a context that has a positive impact that they can see and they can measure and they can be like, wow, I did that through the work that I did. I think that's really powerful learning and also shapes maybe who they are in the next stage of their journey. Recognizing that there are people out there as adults who are engaged in this kind of work and working to make the world just a little bit better. And they might find themselves in that work and maybe something they pursue beyond school. And hopefully have more opportunities as they move through our program to take on a bit more responsibility and connect to the things that they really care about.
I think the interesting thing that you both brought up is this idea of making it meaningful, but not just kind of a jump in and jump out, as Dan was saying, and working with the local community, but it's the post and pre-work, really making those connections and embedding it so it's a cycle and it's just not a moment. And the cycle keeps weaving itself back through their curriculum as transdisciplinary skills and them understanding that. Because I think if we think of anything in the world where you are helping humanity, it's about resilience and, keeping at it and being very thoughtful and organizing and being consistent and keep working and working on that. And I really like that connection that you're making, is saying that we spend a lot of time at the beginning in the classroom and making those connections, and then afterwards the post work, because I think that's where it really starts sinking in and the connections can be made, because different kids learn differently. They'll synthesize this very differently at different times. But that kind of arc that you're creating, I think, is super impactful. Scott?
I just want to add that doesn't have to be huge and overwhelming. This can be something that is a small step. My good friend Darcy Lund talks about teaspoons of change and that these little actions matter. And by giving students agency and setting them up for success, but empowering them to design actions at an age-appropriate level, we've got students as young as 3 years old in school who are engaged as global citizens. And it's on a manageable scale. They're sending gratitude messages to the people in their community who helped them to have an amazing day. And as we work through, we're building this mindset, and we're building these skills. And gradually we see students take on more and more responsibility. And by the time they get to high school in a program like this that is school-wide, students are doing some really amazing work. And coming back to something Sophie said, like, how does this connect to the next step? This is what makes kids interesting when they're applying to universities. We have a lot of amazing schools, and we have a lot of amazing students who score really well on tests and do really well academically. But this is the kind of work, when we think about global citizenship, when we think about taking action, this is the kind of work that helps kids stand out and become interesting, and it supports that work. It's not something that's kind of pulling on different sides where we're thinking about, well, we have to be focused on academics or we have to be focused on global citizenship. There is a mutual connection here, I think, when we're applying our learning in a way where we see that transfer and then we're applying it, it sticks with us. And we're able to do some really cool things, but also it does support students who are moving on to that next level to help them stand out with some of the amazing work they're doing.
Yeah, and the fact that I think Sophie was saying that too is if many of these kids are going to be in positions where their careers, and just because of their socioeconomic standing, the chances of them ending up as a manager or running an organization is going to be, significant. And that's when they can really make those changes. I'm just wondering, if you look at the political landscape today and the way even, I'm not going to get political or name anybody or name any things, but we know that, humanitarian aid is being diminished. The UN, the WHO, there are serious budget cuts. We're seeing that all over. The narrative is what you're talking about is not really a priority, or it's a priority being watered down, or it's actually being countered by a very different narrative that tends to be more authoritarian, not always about equity and inclusion and justice. And so I'm wondering, kids are watching this. I was just talking to some people, and one of the some high school kids, and they were just talking about the Charlie Kirk video that was just polluting their feeds. And now there's this other video of some rapper or something, and there's a body of a girl in the back of his car, and that got onto the feeds. So they're seeing this stuff. The algorithms are really quite intense, and they live by TikTok and Snapchat and Instagram Reels, whatever you like to think. Many kids, that's their point of reference. So how do you, keep that light still shining when you have so many very counter examples? And, Sophie, you said about the positive narrative. How do you still bring out the positive narrative when there's so much really against this positive narrative, like it or not?
I don't want to downplay how challenging this is in schools because of the media diet that some of our students consume. I'm the parent of 2 high school students and can absolutely attest to the reels and TikToks and the way they consume and learn about the world. And that's why I think it's so important for schools to think about media literacy. Like, we think about how challenging it is for us as educators or as adults even to kind of process all the different AI stuff that looks really real that may not be. How do we unpack this? And we struggle as adults. And imagine our students. Like, we have students probably as young as grade 3 and grade 4 who have their own phones. And that's the kind of platforms they're on. I think it's really our responsibility as educators to think about media literacy and really unpack some of this and think about who created this message. What are they doing? What creative techniques have they used to try to get my attention? What are some things they want me to do as a result of seeing their video? And a lot of our students are also creators of media. And thinking about, coming back to Sophie's idea about focusing on the positive and media for good, how might we as educators to create opportunities for students to create media for good and share some of the things we care about? And we love designing learning experiences like this. We've got one called 60 Seconds to Change the World, where students create a 60-second film about an issue that they care about. And they might raise awareness through the body of that piece, and they only have 60 seconds. So they got to have some really good critical thinking. and ethical thinking and just different ways they want to engage their audience. And then finishing off with a call to action where they can inspire their audience as soon as they leave the theater or as soon as they stop looking at their phones, some things they can do right now to make a difference. I think if we can model that in schools, model positive use of media, but also help students to have some skills to unpack the media they're consuming. But it also comes back to creating safe spaces in our classroom to really have a place of belonging where students feel they're okay to share different perspectives. And we encourage that and have them look at different perspectives around an issue. You brought up Charlie Kirk. I think there was a lot of really terrible things in the media talking about how one side was supporting or even endorsing the murder of someone who, and that's terrible. I think everyone outside of a screen probably agrees that murder is bad. Not everyone necessarily would agree with his viewpoints, but that doesn't matter, I don't think. When we come down to something so tragic like this, when we see someone who has a family being killed like that, it's awful. And I think that I would hope that most people, like humanity, would prevail there. But behind a screen, it's different. I was just talking to Dr. Nolan Higdon, is a professor of media literacy at the University of California. And we were talking on his podcast called Disinformation Detox. And just about how being behind a screen can really create just a different environment. So how do we take that on in classrooms? It's really about having those conversations and leaning into some of these difficult topics, because the students are interested in this. Students want to engage in this. And how might we think about our curriculum where we're looking at persuasive writing? Maybe we express that through a debate, where we not just think about winning a debate, but really thinking about what's an action step after that debate to have a positive impact. Sophie, I'm going to pass over to you.
Thank you. And yes, I completely agree with you, Scott. There's a lot to do in the media. And one thing I wanted to add, and it's definitely been the favorite part of my job with Inspire Citizens, is really thinking about student leadership. And, we're having a lot of anxieties, especially in younger generations, when they think about all of those issues that they are exposed to. And, we lost an amazing person this week called Jane Goodall. And one key word that she's always sharing throughout all of her podcasts and writing is really this idea of hope. How can we spark that level of hope, that emotion, that we can do something about it? And I meet so many kids who want to do something about it, but then they don't know how, like they don't know where to start. And if you think about the SDGs themselves, the Sustainable Development Goals, they're pretty big objectives and pretty ambitious objectives. Like the first one, zero poverty. How can you ask a 15-year-old kid to erase poverty? And so, it comes back from that idea of doing what you can in your local community. And so with Inspire Citizens, we're kind of mapping out what are the leadership skills that our students need when they're put in leadership positions so they can have the right tools to do something. And, if we're zooming out also, we're talking a lot here about sustainability or, service learning. And sometimes it feels a bit abstract. And even sadly, I would say sometimes it has a negative connotation where, sustainability can be as simple as, why do people want me to put this plastic bottle into that trash and not this trash? Or why should I take less the plane or blah, blah, blah. And so I think we're also here to change the definition itself of those words. Sustainability can mean so many more things, can mean so many positive impacts. Regeneration, we're talking a lot about regeneration with our colleague Ivy, who's really thinking about how can we do better instead of just keeping the system as it is, but really just regenerate our ecosystems. There's so many things, even leadership. If you think about those models of leadership that are, spread across media or the way we define it, we see leadership as I need to control everything. And leadership doesn't mean that. Leadership means what is my role? What can I do? And how can I use that in my group in collaboration with others to do something better? I mean, I always talk about the myth of the American self-made man, where, you need to crush everybody to go at the top. And in reality, I met maybe, 100 or 150 social entrepreneurs already. None of them did it alone. All of them did it with a team, with partners, with people they met, with places they've been to. And so that's also, if we change the way students see themselves as leaders, and if we give them the hope to be able to do something about the issues that they care about, then that's something that, if this can happen in school, how beautiful is it, for the students and the next generations?
Yeah, really interesting point, Sophie. Yeah, I was still processing something that Scott said about, like the problem with social media is, people not getting involved in debates, and that for me is getting people to have discussions. And John, actually, I'll disagree with you a bit about Charlie Kirk. I mean, I didn't like a lot of things he said. I think he had a couple of good points, but what I liked about him is
I'm not. The thing that I was saying was that these kids, that social media algorithms were taking that murder and making. I'm not saying that I'm either for him or not.
Okay, I missed that.
It was just more the algorithmic. The way the algorithm was working was that it was propagating around kids, young adolescents' feeds, and we know because content is gone. That's what I was saying. I was not saying anything about. I'm Swiss, but no comment on Charlie Kirk.
Oh, well, I'll tell you one thing I really like about him, and this comes back to what Scott said about debate. Like, you can agree with him or disagree with him, but his whole thing was debating people. Him and his, obviously the problem with TikTok and Instagram Reels, it can just take one clip out of context, and it can hear, Charlie Kirk crushes liberal student, and it's not very positive. But if you actually watch his full videos, like when he went to the Oxford Union, and he'll just debate people for 3 hours, and I think on any side, any political view, any view about anything in the world, I think that's what's great, and I think that is the big problem in social media. And I think, one thing I think you guys are doing is just encouraging people to have discussions, because I think, again, not to get political, but I think the current situation in the US and the UK, where I'm from, has encouraged people to I've got my view, and I hate the people who've got a different view to me, and we don't have a discussion about it anymore. And honestly, a lot of people in international schools are just as guilty of this. I know a lot of people who work for international schools, teachers who they will hate someone with a different opinion. And I think that what you guys are doing, encouraging just discussion, is the most positive thing for society right now, and talking to people who disagree and being open to changing your opinions and having nuanced opinions about topic, not that fit into difficult, and that hopefully leading into doing something positive in the world. I know there was a lot in there. Sorry.
No, but Dan, I can't agree with you more. And you've always, throughout the years that we've done this is something that you've really highlighted, is that we've lost that capacity for debate. And I completely agree with you. When Charlie Kirk is sitting down and debating people in a verbal, thoughtful way, whatever you believe or whatever you agree or not, the fact of doing that, we've lost that. Yeah. And even you see that in schools, when schools are, having been a school leader, sometimes there's no room for debate. You're just wrong, and now we're angry. And we're not willing to find some middle ground. I don't know how many times I've been in situations where there is no room for debate because it's us versus them. And I do appreciate how you always bring this back, is that we need to kind of nurture that beauty of a debate, of sharing ideas, and we can walk away not agreeing together, but we enjoy the fact that we were two humans debating. And thank you, Dan, for always bringing that up, because that's something I think we don't do. Scott.
John, I really like what you're saying there. And we sometimes talk about the lost art of civil discourse. And it's hard to look around the world and find positive examples of that. So I think it's on us as educators to model this for our students, to create a safe space where we can disagree, but also to think about, where might we agree? These are all complex, nuanced issues. There's going to be some things we disagree on. Like, if you imagine a Venn diagram, like, those circles are going to overlap. There might not be a lot in the middle, but I think if we look at some of these big issues that we really struggle to agree on, there might be some common ground. So rather than shouting talking points back and forth, what if we looked at where those circles, those viewpoints overlap, and think about that as an action step to move in a positive direction? We ran a program in schools for middle school students, for high school students. I'm not sure we've ever done it in elementary, but not to say you couldn't. We call it Debate for Impact, or Debate Forward. I think it had a couple different names at a couple different schools, to model this and show students how we can have productive disagreement. We talked about it with student leaders as well, because if you don't disagree, you probably have a dysfunctional team. I think it's Patrick Lencioni talks about different, I think the 5 dysfunctions of teens is one of his groups, or one of his books, I should say. And if we don't trust each other enough to disagree, we're not going to be an effective team. So I think being a student leader, being able to identify and be able to collaborate and think about those skills, but also those different viewpoints within our student organizations, within the groups that we lead, helps us to be a stronger team. And I think we absolutely need to model this in school, because we don't see a lot of positive role models in governments or elsewhere out there in the world right now.
Sophie.
And yeah, I completely agree with Scott on that. And funny enough, we've been actually creating a module. Well, Scott has been creating a module about conflict resolution and really training students to have that skill of, okay, there's a conflict in my group. I have an opinion. They have another opinion. What happens? Because as good as it is to state the problem, I think we need to equip students to find a solution. And so one thing we did, it was in the 60 Seconds to Change Film Festival that we hosted in Singapore last. We had a simple module about active listening. And active listening is such an important skill. And it's actually, sadly, the first time I heard about it. And, it can be as simple as when you receive an information, you pause, you reformulate, you make sure you understand, and then you ask clarifying questions instead of always adding your opinion or judging it. Or you have dialogue walks or nonviolent communications. I mean, Aaron has been teaching me so much about that. We always joke because, Canadians are quite known to be very kind people. And French people, we are not famous to be the most, happy people or kind people. So in that sense, those are tools that he actually brought to me through our work, and those are tools that I can bring into the classroom. We also have structured feedback, like when you receive an idea, or when students at the end of a student leadership conference, they're talking about what they want to do and the action steps that they want to take over the year. Then how might you reflect, debrief, and give the right feedback for them to be encouraged to apply their idea, but also review and maybe change a few things that they can improve on.
So one of the things I'm curious is that, having been in schools, and I know Dan knows this too, schools are super busy places. And at the end of the day, many schools, and we just had a whole thing on assessment with the Melbourne metrics here not too long ago. Dan and I talked to them. I'm wondering, how do you go into a school and tell them, guess what, we're going to need a lot of time to do all this, and we're going to need to make it part of the curriculum. It needs to be embedded. It needs to be meaningful. It needs to develop intrinsically. And schools are like, well, hold on. We've got IB results. We've got IB tests. We've got this, that. There's a tournament. I'm just wondering, how are you actually working with school leaders, making them understand this has to become a new priority, especially the idea of media literacy and this idea of active listening and this idea of feedback loops, really developing that, because that's a pretty tall order when you come into a school that's already got a structure and everybody's running around, busier than they need to be.
I love that you brought up Melbourne metrics, because that is a great example of a shift that we might take to really value this kind of work. We're big fans of Melbourne metrics. And I think when we think about how we take a whole school approach to this, the reality is if we look at our guiding statements, regardless if you're an IB school or Cambridge curriculum or a Common Core, we probably somewhere in our mission, our vision, our values, or the things on our website, we already say we do these things in a lot of cases, and we don't often have ways to measure that. And we can think about this in a few different ways, but I think when we can make learning more meaningful and we can connect students to the issues that they care about, while still, Aaron likes to say, feed two birds with one scone. So we're not necessarily throwing out some of the other things. We're just looking to take some of the amazing teaching and learning that's happening in a school and enhance that through an empathy to impact approach. and maybe move away from a traditional 5-paragraph essay to have students be thinking about how they might use their learning to take action. Maybe it's a media piece to advocate. Maybe it is a direct connection with a community partner where they're applying this work in a way that we can assess and we can see that we're still hitting those same standards. We definitely empathize with teachers. It's so busy in school, and teachers are being asked a lot. And every year it feels like we still have last year's new thing, and now we have this year's new thing, and we're probably going to have next year's new thing. To us, global citizenship is the thing that ties all the other things together. We're bringing in our social emotional learning. We're thinking about diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice. We're thinking about well-being, creating a sense of belonging. This work is a way to make a connection for teachers so we don't feel like we're going in 100 different directions. This is the direction we're going to go, and it's going to bring in some of these other pieces. And we can look at how we design learning in a purposeful way to be able to achieve this while not feeling overwhelmed. And it's great feedback that we get when we're working with schools. Like, we get to an end of the year after working with a senior leadership team and then working with teachers on building capacity. And this is a conversation I had with one of our school partners. Like, we've been talking about this for so long, and this year we got stuff done, and it was awesome. And being able to tell those stories, being able to send that out in their school's social media feed, being able to involve the parents and tell these stories, this is what's setting schools apart. You know, some of our school partners already tell us that, you know, parents are choosing our school because they want their students to develop as global citizens. We want to be, we want to be smart. We want to be still achieving academically, but those aren't mutually exclusive. We're able to do that together, and by working with schools to understand where they are, like where they are in the world, what their culture of the school is, what their aspirations are. It'd be awesome if there was a one-size-fits-all for this, and there isn't. Like, all of our school partnerships look a little bit different because we all are in a different place on this journey, and we all have different aspirations of really what our priorities are. So working with Inspire Citizens is just a way we co-design. We don't have, like, here's our book, here's our 2-hour talk. We're going to be up on the stage and then wish you well as we head back to the airport. We really want to have a long-term partnership where we work collaboratively over time and help to bring this work to life and move from a facilitated approach to coach to eventually self-directed, and working ourselves out of a job to see those programs continue to thrive without us having to be there. Sophie, do you have anything to add? Or sorry, John, go ahead.
Yeah, I know. I think this idea of making it really structured and not coming in and layering something on top, but looking at where are the opportunities that we're already doing. You're right. Everybody's a global citizen. I mean, I've been in 8 different international schools, and the missions and the global citizenship and humanity and caring, that's always part of it. And all schools, I think, give them credit. They try the best they can, but sometimes the structures and the way things are. And I think, as you're saying, you come in as a partner, not to tell them what to do, but to co-create something that's sustainable and that comes through the curriculum and is something that's measurable. Because I think that's the lovely anecdote you say. Some school says, we've been talking about this for years, but this year we actually did something concrete and it was measurable. So I think that's a really important approach that you're creating, kind of that framework and a web that people can hang on to. Sophie.
Absolutely. There's one sentence that I think Scott came up with, and I'm actually saying it to most of the calls I have now with educators, which is learning from and acting with. And that, for me, is a core statement of how we work with schools, how we work with our community partners, how we work with students. And, the reality, I mean, I've been working a bit shorter, but for the last 8 years with amazing teachers and amazing students. And sometimes they have all of those projects, those ideas, those partners. But then when the teacher leaves or the student leaves, then the project leaves with them. And the core basis of sustainability is to be able to sustain it on the long term. So how do we manage those transitions to make sure that we're not just, as Scott said, coming, having an inspiring workshop and then leaving? And one of the first steps of what we do when we work with schools is that we do a whole school strategic map. And so we're looking at, okay, what does this teacher do? And what does this unit involve? And where is this community partner? And where is this student leadership project? And what does this club do? And then we really gather that into a vision, into a strategic map that really shows that everything is connected. So it's not separate initiatives, it's actually a learning flow and a learning journey that connects all of those initiatives together. And I think that's why sometimes it feels overwhelming, because you have all of those big objectives, like you need to have all your units designed and attached to SDGs, and you need to have those amazing community partnerships that last for years. And so we need to also step back and see, how do we get things started? Like, where do we start meaningfully, and how can we grow from that on the long term? Scott, you want to add anything?
Yeah, I think, well, first of all, I think learn from and act with is a genuine Aaron Moniz, not one of mine, but I do love it a lot. And I think it's really, we come back to that idea of busyness in schools. And a lot of schools, we may have early years all the way to seniors all on the same campus, or we might be on different campuses or different buildings. But we are so busy in schools that we don't often take the time to pause and celebrate some of the amazing things that are already happening. And we might not even know. There might be an amazing project in grade 4 that no one other than the grade 4 teachers know about. And one of the things that I love to do as we're starting out with this visioning work is to do a whole school audit and have some representation from across the school to be able to unpack some of the amazing things that are already happening. We're not starting from zero with this work. Schools are doing some really amazing work, and thinking about how we might involve our communications team to celebrate and showcase this work that we're doing, and maybe even inspire other people, other schools who think, hey, that was a really cool project that this school is doing with their 4th graders. We could do something like that too at our school. And this idea that this is a collaborative thing, that we want to kind of build an ecosystem. And that's really been our focus this year, is kind of building a community of educators who are passionate about global citizenship, who can share expertise together and share this journey. And I just, like, what if we could set up a program and we have students at every grade level engaged in maybe even just one unit to start with that's explicitly focused on developing as global citizens. We have different kinds of learning engagements, and maybe we're connecting to a different SDG goal, working with different community partners. We have a diverse kind of set of experiences as we work through, and we don't have that SDG burnout where we're working on climate for 3 or 4 years in a row, but really kind of taking that high altitude vertical alignment approach to this work. And students are able to develop that portfolio. Our friends at NIST in Bangkok call it the journey of a change maker. And they have students be able to create these artifacts and stories and pictures of their learning all the way through school, and building this portfolio of their journey becoming global citizens. And it's doable. I think that's what it does feel overwhelming. It does feel like there's a lot of steps at the beginning, but if we break that down, I think that's one of our superpowers, is being able to break this down and understanding that sometimes we do have to go slow to go fast. And we might be talking about an 18-month timeline, or a 2-year timeline, or a 3-year timeline, because we want it to be feasible and realistic and achievable. And we are doing a lot of other things. So let's make a plan that we're capable of achieving, and have those signposts along the way where we can check in and see how we're doing and be able to have that support throughout that journey.
I think the idea of breaking it down and making it, as you said, having those signposts is really important, because so often it does feel overwhelming. And the other thing that I thought really was important, it was the idea that there are isolated groups that are doing amazing things in schools, and large schools, often that doesn't travel, or people don't notice it. So I think it's about, as you say, breaking it down, having a vertical look, and really making it sure it goes through the whole school. I love this change maker journey anecdote you bring from NIST. I'm just wondering, Dan brought this up, and I think it's an important point. One of the things that Dan, you were referring to the Oxford Union and Charlie Kirk, the idea of different opinions coming together and feeling safe to express their opinions. How do you create that when you are in a schools that are multicultural and have very different, kids from different ethnic backgrounds, different religious backgrounds, and different political landscapes? Parents, just because you go to an international school doesn't mean you're right wing or left wing. You could be anywhere in between or both. And I'm just wondering, how do you make sure a child that might be disagreeing with everything else his peers are saying can speak up? Because that's often the hardest I see when I work with kids, is often a kid will say something and all the other kids are like, well, you shouldn't be saying that. And I'm like, no, time out. He should be saying that. That's his opinion. Now let's how do you develop that?
And even teachers sometimes telling kids that they shouldn't be saying that.
Dan, thank you. That's really important, is because also teachers just assume there should be a certain narrative, and how do you create that where maybe a very opposing view that goes counter to maybe the mission of the school or the teacher's opinion or what the lesson is about? How do you make sure those spaces are available for those kids to feel safe and know that even though their opinion might be not with everybody else or counter to it, they do have the right to express it?
Let's go back to my teacher training a long time ago and sitting in Dr. Diana Schaefer's class up in North Bay in Canada. And she talked about the teachable moment. And I think teachers have an opportunity when things like that come up in the classroom to sweep it into the corner or to lean in and embrace that teachable moment. And I think that's where we can make some progress with this, to understand that we can have a conversation in our classroom that is a safe space, that we all have kind of developed this trust and sense of belonging. I think teachers are magical at creating this right from day one in this school. Sometimes it takes longer with different groups, but this is a superpower I think a lot of teachers bring to the classroom, being able to create that safe space. But I think something that we've done is having students debate a topic from not their point of view. And it comes back to, we can connect this to a lot of our language standards when we're thinking about persuasive writing or making persuasive arguments, and being able to research and be able to debate from a different side. I remember as a teacher, we did this one time where we said, all right, this is our topic, and you're going to be assigned whether it's perspective A or perspective B at the time of the debate. So you have to kind of be able to research both sides, so you know which one to either way you're able to support and give a good argument, whether that's your position or not. Another thing too is thinking about approaching maybe a controversial topic and saying to students that you don't actually have to have an opinion on everything.
Yeah,
you can be undecided. And let's have a look at all the different perspectives surrounding an issue. And we're not going to make a decision yet. We're just going to get all these different perspectives on the table and think about the supporting arguments to that. Anyone who's got an opinion, whether we agree with them or not, is got, hopefully, and this is maybe changing in the media a little bit, some facts and perspectives to back that up. Maybe that's not always true in our political landscape. That's a whole other rabbit hole. But hopefully our students were able to kind of get some thoughts and perspectives and resource and supporting arguments and evidence to support a different perspective. And by looking to see that there isn't really a moral high ground necessarily. Well, certainly there are on some issues. I think everyone thinks they're arguing that side, and that's the challenge, is how do we build empathy? I think it still comes back to the idea of empathy and understanding that we can disagree, but we're all playing for the same team, essentially. We're all humans together, and having that human connection and approaching something with empathy as opposed to, well, you disagree with me on this, or I can't even talk to you. I don't want to be friends with you. We are enemies, right? And I think social media does a great job of putting people in boxes on some pretty complex topics, whether it's reproductive rights or gun laws. These are two very separate issues. But if you're in box A or box B, you get a packaged set of beliefs. I think we're losing our ability to be critical thinkers and be able to have an opinion on each of these topics. And the more we can model that, the more we can support and lean into some of these challenging conversations in the classroom, but also model being able to have a respectful conversation where, coming back to what Sophie was talking about, active listening and being good listeners and understanding, oh, I actually see where we agree on a point here.
Yeah, Steve, just got really super quick point on that. I think what you said about encouraging students to argue the other side of an issue is huge. I think that is a great skill that not enough people focus on. There's something I learned recently about the concept of a steel man. I'm not sure if you've heard of this phrase, but a straw man argument is where I'm arguing with John. I'll kind of pick what I think of the weakest point of his argument. I'll create a straw man. I'll kind of represent that as John's whole argument. I'll attack the straw man. And that's kind of a bit of a kind of crappy thing. And when you know it, you recognize people doing it to you all the time. But a steel man is where I'm going to actually kind of reconstruct John's opinion, like the best version I can think of John's, all the arguments he's got, and actually think of that argument. And when you start to do this, it actually encourages you to change your opinion about things. And I don't always succeed, obviously, like no one does, but I definitely don't. But I think encouraging people to do that and argue the other side, it's a great step to actually make focus on changing your opinion about things.
And I think about the process, like it's the counterclaim. And that's when we talk to kids in debates and say that think of the best claim, not the worst piece of evidence like you're talking about with the straw man. Think of their best claim and be prepared to have a rebuttal for that. And again, part of that debate process, I love that idea of, rather than focusing on, and nothing is perfect. There are no perfect solutions. We know that. And it's really easy to pick apart from the straw man kind of perspective. But if we help students kind of see that there's value in thinking about those strong claims on the other side, again, we're building connection, we're building empathy, I think, through that as well.
Yeah.
Sophie.
Yeah, absolutely. I think empathy is really the starting point to a lot of different change. And, we were talking earlier about social media, and, there's this reality that social media also reinforces this, linear and I am right, and this is my opinion and the only one that exists, because algorithms put you into that, kind of tunnel where you only have content that matches your opinion. And the second stage that comes after empathy is aware. And so you have care, aware, able, and impact. And aware is a very important piece also, where, young people nowadays, most of the information they get is through 2 minutes, bite-sized, oversimplified contents. And, I think, Scott, you were saying it earlier, there's a big focus in our work on research and getting kids to actually not only research through ChatGPT that will tell them a ready-made answer that might be disconnected, but also actually talk to people, like, talk to your classmates, but also talk to your local community. I mean, the kids sometimes we work with, they live in a country that's very far from theirs, that has different social code, that have different ways to function. And so if we get them to connect directly with the people that are around them, then they can really build their own opinion about this. And one small tool that I'm really passionate about is systems thinking. And that's something that really challenged the way I see things, because it's very simple. When I was a bit younger, I would be very much passionate about nature, and every time I would see plastic on the beach, I would be like, how people can dare to just throw it on the beach and then not care. And actually it's way more complex than that. And sometimes our brains as humans, they don't like this complexity. They want to know that, okay, I see this, I can solve it, points. And so there's this idea also when we talk to kids to get them to appreciate the complexity of a system and to understand each piece that composes it, so they can find a leverage point and they can do something about it, but because they are informed about how the system works overall. And it's not as simple as this is right and this is wrong. There's a layer of complexity that really brings more depth into the solutions that then they will create for their community partners or for their schools or for the way they interact with other students.
I think, Sophie, this idea of systems thinking is so important. And, I know Dan and I work with a lot of schools, and often that's what's not happening. When you go and work with a school as a consultant or and Dan's capacity helping them with their IT systems. It's often there is no systems thinking, you know, and it's very reactive. And I think understanding that there is a domino effect and there's a system, and the plastic on the beach is really just one part of a bigger system. I think that's so important. I just want to, we're going to wrap up here, and just would love if you both would tell us what still makes you hopeful when you look at the world today, what keeps you going, and just maybe a short sentence to leave our audience with what keeps you hopeful about the future and all the amazing work that you're doing with your organization, especially making it systematic and embedding it as co-creators, and also supporting it a long term to make it sustainable. Sophie, what keeps you hopeful?
So I think the part of my work that gives me the most hope is when we finish student leadership conferences, we encourage students to share the action steps and the projects that they want to implement throughout the year, because they have a plan after those conferences. And it's just magical to see how many ideas they have. And when we give them the voice and the tools, then they are actually the ones designing all the solutions that we need to live in a more beautiful and harmonious world.
Thank you. Scott, what are you hopeful?
It's really the students that I have the pleasure of working with. Probably my favorite part of my job is getting to host our Empathy to Impact podcast. And when we first started, we knew there was a number of really amazing, like this one, educator to educator podcasts, and we wanted to do something different. So we go straight to the customer and we interview students. So anywhere from seniors all the way down to, I think our youngest crew on the podcast was in first grade. And having students just be able to have a platform and have a voice to share the work that they're doing as change makers and global citizens, I have the privilege of facilitating those conversations and sharing those stories on our podcast. I think we're up to 84 episodes over the last few years. And it's so cool to hear how students are really taking ownership of their learning and having a positive impact in their community, and how empowered they feel by being able to do that. That gives me hope.
Nice. Dan, any thoughts about your hopes?
No, I think Scott and Sophie have said it all perfectly. You know, it's interesting when I met Steve and Aaron. One of the things I bonded with them, the two of them, is we're all really into punk music, and I was really into it when I was young, and that was kind of my version of Empathy to Impact. You know, we didn't have anything like that when I was young, but that music scene was, you know, encouraged you to question authority and think about different people and have an international view. So that was kind of what I think an interesting sort of anecdote about Steve and Aaron that led me to sort of bond with them.
I love
Still a strong influence in our work.
Yeah.
I love the connection to punk, because I was living in England from 75 to 80, and that was just phenomenal. The whole ska movement, two-tone, it was quite a loud saying, we're not okay the way the world is, and we want something different. And it was said in 2-minute songs that were just amazing. And so on that note, Scott and Sophie, thank you so much for being part of the International School podcast. I want to remind our audience, Inspire Citizens, you go to the show notes. They've put some lovely links, PDFs. Go and spend some time with them. You can reach out. Scott does the podcast, so definitely spend some time. We want to again thank the audience so much for your continued comments and feedback, and also more and more people keep joining our LinkedIn. It just grows every day. So we really appreciate your support. Dan, so nice to see you.
You
and
too.
We actually never get to see each other physically very much, but we get to see each other virtually, and so it's always nice.
Let's meet up again this year at some point.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you all, and thank you to our audience for your support. Have a great week. We'll see you next time. Bye.